guy here at Agile, okay? So, what I've done is I've distilled it down to 2 surefire techniques which will guarantee that you nail it every time. Okay, I'm kidding, right? I'm kidding. It's just for these things, you are supposed to have some sort of, so you get your money's worth, so you have some sort of a silver bullet which you can take home and try. And so I just felt I had to make up the 2 surefire techniques at the end. But more importantly for this particular talk, see how it made you feel. In the end, Agile adoption, which will find you making claims like that, if you run into resistance, there's going to be someone who is going to be sitting there, and you are going to make some sort of a claim. You are going to be the guy who sells the snake oil. You are going to be the person who is trying to get them to do something which clearly they haven't done before. And so just remember briefly how you felt, and now forget about it because I find it embarrassing. But this really comes down to trust. And what we'll examine in this session is a couple of ways how you can get that trust and how you can lose that trust. And lest anybody gets scared, lest any of the developers get scared that it's also sort of a squishy session. Yes, it has architecture diagrams in it, right? Also, in case the managers get worried that it's all totally geeky, nothing to do with real world. Yes, it even has a project plan in it. So, if you don't trust this, you leave. Anyway, let's have a look and see what builds and destroys trust. And Dickens said it well. It's about great expectations. So we're going to look at some takes on great expectations. So the traditional management side of the house, and for excellent reasons, would look at getting all the requirements in advance, document the system, implement, test, and deploy. I'm not going to launch into an anti-waterfall rant because I just got an estimate for our bathroom reno from our renovation person who has worked with many condo developments and so on, and many other references before, and who knows exactly what works and what doesn't to build trust. I was going to scan that in because he gives us a detailed list of exactly, rounded to the nearest dollar, what materials are needed. He can tell when he will start and when he will finish, and he has all the labor and it's fixed. There is trust for you. I leave my wife to make the colors match for the reno, and this is also trust, but this is well placed. So, you look at, why can't we do that? Well, we all know why we can do that. It's the learning, all the other stuff. No need to go into that. But you have a lot of people who manage these projects and who go by their bathroom reno in terms of expectations. It's simple, it's a shortcut. It is something which you are familiar with, which for renovating bathrooms and building cars works great. So, and I trust this, whatever it is, won't break through the ceiling. So, great expectations, right? Let's renovate that bathroom. Works great if only. So what did he have to do to get that estimate down? All right, maybe we should break it. We should use it. No, let's just trust this. Anyway, so great expectations. If people would only be more diligent documenting requirements, he sure was. He measured everything, and he listened carefully to what we had to say and looked very serious about it. Designers would think things through. Yes, I'm gonna not push the bathroom analogy. You don't want to know it's going to be a mess. So So if developers would write better code, so this is where the bathroom stuff breaks down. If he writes code to renovate the bathroom. Anyway, if testers would be more thorough, and if requirements wouldn't change over time. So this is the if-only effect. And when it comes to expectations in traditionally managed projects, the if-only effect gets you every time, right? And this is sort of the mindset. If you walk into this and you don't really know the dynamics of software development, this is what kind of gets you. This is the expectations you get. It comes down to being more thorough and being more like a guy who estimates for your bathroom. So, where does that leave us? It leaves us with great expectations. Take two. This is more like it. It's an Agile conference. So let's look at embracing change, pulling instead of pushing, self-organizing teams, continuous integration, automated testing, and continuous improvement. You are starting this Agile transformation in your organizations right now, and this is what we are going to do. And you have great expectations. And of course, because I clicked the down thing once too many, you already know that there's a fly in the soup. It works great if only you're in this wonderful, enthusiastic thing. You have a boss who truly buys into this. You have someone who says, yes, we need to go there because we had some very spectacular failures. Go for it. And then after a nice start, things may not going so well because it works great only if management is serious about empowering teams. One person's team empowerment is the other person's micromanagement perception. Is everything. We're coming back to that theme, how the words mean different things to different people, right? And so, you know what, the Kanban thing, it's so obvious. It flows from lane to lane. You have this instant visibility of where everything is. Even think about it, you can skip all those boring status meetings. Because status at all times is obvious. Status at all times is, even if you have thunder rolling in the background, if everything goes haywire, who knows what they're doing, it's obvious from the lanes. You can see where it is, you can see how it flows, you can see how it moves. Isn't that beautiful? But people just don't get it. They kind of go back to the old way because the Kanban thing doesn't make sense to me. There's no clear sense of responsibility. I don't see who's going to work on that. I'm going to pre-assign it. Leave me alone. And they don't. Okay, so developers, right? Solid. If developers would learn to write code which is more loosely coupled, which has more cohesion, and which is generally readable by any other developer rather than understandable by themselves. If everybody would just take single responsibility, this Agile stuff would work, if only, right? And of course, if we wouldn't have all that legacy code. So, okay, we got if-onlys for both your waterfall, and we got if-onlys for all this Agile stuff. This is terminally depressing, you know, in your home or something. And this gets us closer to the core of it. How does it make you feel? We're almost at the architecture diagrams, right? So just bear with me here. So, what did I just say? I said the if-onlys were all about technical or process solutions. They're all about if only we use this technique or we follow this process. And here is the quote from the wiki page about technocrats and the individuals with technical training and occupations who perceive many important societal problems as being solvable, often while proposing technology-focused solutions. Now, scratch the societal part. It's thinking a bit perhaps too big, but and I'm also not gonna ask for a show of hands who will see who kind of at heart is a technocrat. But we have this thing, I feel, in this industry where technical solutions are really, or process solutions. In this world, the process is very much like a technical thing. From a defined state, transformational steps to some end or something. We're technocrats at heart. Many of us are technocrats at heart. And this shapes our thinking when we try to introduce cultural change. And this drives a lot of what happens, I think. So if we for a moment move away from this technocratic view, which certainly you may not all feel that way, but the way I just presented these previous things, it certainly fits a technocratic mold. If we move away from that and we take another look at what just happened, we go through some of these points from earlier on. And this is the Agile, if only, Agile, should really read, Agile transformation, if only emotionalized, foreign languages, anyway, emotionized edition, okay? So, let's see let's look at all these various statements and revisit them. If only management would be serious about empowering teams. Okay? How does it make you feel? You're at this howl of frustration. Then what does the management feel about that? I really wouldn't know, but for example, what does empowering teams make me look like with my boss, with my peers, with the teams themselves? What if it goes wrong? Right? I'm empowering this team. Who knows what they will do? Also, does it make me feel that if unexpected things happen because these guys go away and do who knows what, will it make me look like a guy who doesn't know what's happening in my own shop? But it's like you're storming this office and saying, boss, we need to empower teams. I love it. I'm not gonna go right away and do this. What's the guy feel? Right? So if developers decide, how do they influence the outcome so we get what we need? Am I losing control? And the Agile answer is, I don't need control. Control is the problem. The solution is to let go. Okay. Well, yeah, but I'm also responsible for the outcomes. It's a whole lot scarier to be responsible for any one of those outcomes if you relinquish control. I've got a shop to mind. I've got bosses to whom I report. I'm a good boss. I want to protect my people. I want to shield them. I want to make sure that we grow in every way. We don't have to lay anyone off. We provide value for the company. How does that happen? How do I look if this doesn't work out? Just because I relinquish control. Also, you know what? We go with that suggestion, and I found a pretty tight ship over the years. I really respect the guys. We're really professional, and really we've always planned it out and followed the plan. So suddenly I let go. I give some of this up, and they go away and do whatever. If that works, I'm sorry, I wouldn't admit that to anyone else. But it looked like I've done it wrong all those years. I don't know, it's sort of the emotional stuff, the stuff under the surface. So, another one here. If only people would get the advantages of CQRS. Really, it's obvious. CQRS is so much easier to manage. It's a so much nicer formula for getting the loose coupling and the cohesion together with domain-driven design to really make this go, and this makes everything, the Agile thing, so much easier. I saw Stefan looking up there. I'm actually not sure myself, but if you were to make a pitch for event-driven things, never mind, it's just great, right? And if folks would just stick to nice readable code by whatever definition, it's just great, right? Again, you storm into there, and what does it mean? So you push for introducing all this stuff. Again, how does it make these developers feel? This fashionable 360 feedback. We looked at the boss, we looked at through him at his boss, we looked at our peers and developers and so on. Well, people prefer the familiar over the comfortable. This sort of ties in with Linda's talk. Perhaps I wouldn't quite put it so categorically that I listened to Linda's talk before, but it differs, right? It depends what your mindset are. But there is something about the devil you know. Yes, our release processes are a pain in the neck. It takes forever to do anything, but we know it will give us a given result. We know that if we do that, we can release like clockwork every a few months or so, but at least we know we can release. It's very uncomfortable, but we can rest assured that the outcome is clear. So that's back of your mind. Oh, this is too much uncertainty, but I can't possibly admit that because I look un-agile if I admit that as a developer. So it happens in my head, but I can't. It's not that I'm going to shout that out. Then you get the next one, which is if it works. Again, it'll look like I've done it wrong all these years. If this event-driven, message-driven stuff works, it means I've just wasted years since I first heard of it, writing stored procedures or doing whatever. It's not that I'm going to say so, but I don't want to look dumb. All this happens in people's heads. And then, you know, a perfectly valid point. Nothing wrong. Leave me alone. It's just a job. Right? Not everybody is in this business to be a sort of trailblazing comet in the star of the advancement of software development, a revolutionary at heart, man the barricades. If it can't be done, but folks, it's just a job, and they do an excellent job at it, with all the commitment that it's done after 8 hours and you go home, then it will never catch on. So all this will be happening in people's heads. They're all valid and perfectly good ways of seeing this. One more example. If only we wouldn't have all that legacy code. It sounds great, but the reason why our release processes are dodgy and the reason why we get nowhere in the long release cycles is it's just a plate of spaghetti. It can't be done. If only it were not like this. And for once, there's an easy technocratic answer. Grow up, legacy code is a fact of life. Okay? So, what do you do? In order, you see all these emotional responses which happen in the back of people's heads while you float these agile things, which will all, because it's very fashionable to be agile, will all be met with openness and enthusiasm. But behind the scenes, there's all this bizarre stuff, all this emotional stuff, all this, you know what? Leave me alone. If I had wanted all that, I would have hung out with the jocks and do the social thing rather than spending so much time playing Space Invaders somewhere in a cave. I'm a geek. Sorry, I just think of myself. Sorry. But anyway, so I'm in this job because I can't be bothered by all this, right? I'm sort of speaking for, I don't know who's subconscious, but so how do you deal with this? So how do you deal with this in work situations? One way to deal with it for starters, is to minimize the reason for having to trigger those reactions in folks to begin with. Being a good geek, you engineer yourself out of it by avoiding setting things up in your work environment, in the way you approach things, to avoid no-win situations. So software design and processes which avoid to put people into no-win situations. Actually I wasn't sure. I googled for clip art for no-win situations, and I'm not sure if I found a good one, but this seemed just, I just found it funny. I don't know. So what kind of no-win situations are we looking at? What's it? Okay, audience question really. Software development. Raise your hand if you've never been in a no-win situation. Okay, I'm joking. Examples, right? You have some examples of what constitutes no-win situations if you're landed with a project you have to deliver on, either as manager or developer. Examples. For example, if you don't own your stack. If you don't own your stack, then everything gets more difficult. If there is somebody who does your front end, somebody who does your back end, if you have conflicting requirements or certain waterfall scenarios, I'm going to dig into some of this a little more. But there's some situations, avoidable no-win situations, which are worth eliminating out of the gate if you can. And so we're going to look into an example situation. So here comes our example company, busmeup.com. It was available as I won't get sued for using the name, and it's because with investors and conferences, the founder of the company can theme song Bus Me Up. And so anyway, it's about transit systems. You have buses, and it answers a simple question of when's the next bus. Given past GPS tracking data for this time of day and traffic patterns, tell me when I'm at a bus stop when the next bus to my destination will arrive. I want to go to there and there. When is the next bus? Tell me that. And our customer for this is sort of transit systems, municipalities, any bus operators, or whatever. So it's a fictional company which deals in software of this kind, and they of course have requirements, and they have some of this stuff already exists, and we're going to look into a couple of enhancements they have to the existing sort of code base and so on, and how this flies in the no-win situations department and what one might do with that. So let's look at busmeup.com's various subsystems. Now they have a mobile app where this is nice when you're at the bus stop. Obviously, you want to check on your mobile app. Hi, I want to go there. Tell me when the next bus to there is coming. Maybe give me a route. They have a web app, as you might expect. Do the whole thing at home, pre-plan it, print it, or whatever. And they have a combined mobile and web app backend. Then they have one component known as the arrival time estimator, the route and bus maintenance application, which is another web app. And finally, they have the interface to the bus bar, GPS module, which sends the bus location to some server, and that's of course input needed to estimate the arrival times. So all the various subsystems, just to introduce you to what busmeup is like. And then we have busmeup.com teams. There's Boston, which has 2 development teams. There's Bangalore, there's another dev team. And there is Vancouver, where the dev and DBA teams are. Okay? So the assumption is that this is a larger company with a larger kind of legacy code base. Because when something is larger, and this is one of the potential no-win situations, then things get more complicated to coordinate. First, okay, not surprising for those, not surprising for folks, but this is supposed to be, this is all simpler if you've got a couple of guys working in a garage. So let's have a look at the BusMeUp architecture. Okay, now this lacks detail for 2 reasons. First of all, you're a sort of an executive audience, and part of the buy-in stuff is if you've got too many arrows and boxes and acronyms, it's harder to gain the trust of any such audience because they think you're a geek. And second of all, there's only so much architecture and boxes and arrows you can fit on a PowerPoint slide. So, of course, you've seen the subsystems, right? And so we have one. Every subsystem is represented here. You have, when we get, sorry, I forgot my laser pointer. Similar to improvise. So, sorry, what was it? Okay, anyway, we're getting into the disorganized, chaotic, no-win situations kind of thing, all part of the presentation, so I thought it goes like this. When we get a new customer online, after we sell it to these guys, trust us, we have a great product for solving your Vancouver transit people to know where the bus comes. They enter the route and bus information into the maintenance site. Then they're good to go because the various buses to which they fit these GPS things and transponder things, they will provide the various information which then is collected, and then the arrival time estimator uses all this information over time. Oh, it's at this bus stop, and just before it arrived, it took at this time of the day this much time to get there from the previous bus stop. Therefore, I can tell that it's going to be there in this place at this time and hour, and so on and so forth. So it collects all that, right? And then you have the website where people can do trip planning perhaps, and they can see when the next bus arrives. And of course the mobile app, no less the same thing, same functionality, one web, one mobile. So why don't we have a shared backend, and it's all by the bus DB. Okay, so here's your architecture. Now, who here kind of sees themselves as a sort of an application architect, just for interest's sake? Who doesn't believe in architects? They're just developers. Yeah. I'm not going to go on believe in another, but here's your basic architecture. This is not uncommon. You have those subsystems. They all interact with this database, right? We're almost there with the no-win situation. This is an existing system, some legacy. Now, we have, well, what do you call it? How does something like this come about? Well, okay, somebody goes ahead and does a project plan and says that this team does this app, this team does the other, all the rest of it, and let's break it down into tasks. So you get yourself that's a project plan-driven architecture. Because if you tell them that this is a project plan-driven architecture, then the end result comes from the way the original plan was drawn out, rather than from conscious architectural decisions. That alone triggers the aforementioned monetary. We've done this for years, we get it to work, and I can't possibly have been wrong all this time. So getting complicated again. So let's look at how the various, so keep that in mind. Let's look at how the various teams are split up. You have Boston with 2 development teams for the front ends, one for the website, one for mobile. And you have Vancouver, which owns the back-end logic for those front ends. You have the Bangalore team, which does the route and bus maintenance site. And finally, the DBA team, which does this thing at the back, arrival time estimation and the bus bound GPS data collector. They write their thing there, they have some coders, they have some stored procedure folks, and so on, and they put that together. If I may ask, who's in a larger company where you actually have multiple teams working on multiple projects? Okay, so this is, I was hoping to, it's somewhat far-fetched, especially in the Romanian, I was hoping to sort of, this is really for larger things. When things get bigger, this is when you run into these problems. So I was hoping to give a half incredible example for that. So this is how it's split up. And let's look at a project they have to deliver. The busmeup.com announcements, let's look at a potential iteration, not very big, it's a short presentation. Design and implement the favorite routes page. As in, I take this every day. I want the information to be a sort of not entered every time. And fix the estimate, as an arrival time estimate, on the website differs from the mobile site bug. This has been a bit of a thorn in their side ever since the initial release, sometimes inexplicable, but sometimes it just doesn't match up. And so this is for the busmeup.com site. And then you have your backend enhancements. Design the validation logic for the favorites page, whatever the rules have to be. And of course, this needs to be stored somewhere. So there's some business rules around. It gets to you have to be a signed up user and all that. So implement persistence for that. So this is what we want to do. And you can see that on the face of it, this involves two teams. The Boston Dev Team 1 and the Vancouver backend team. Well, the problem, that doesn't look quite right. Why is that? Well, if you look back at the architecture in this thing, you can see that the bug, which is about non-matching arrival times, could really be anywhere. It could be a problem here, it could be a problem here, or it could be here, or it could be the arrival time estimator. It's somewhat less likely that it's in the GPS collector. It could be in 4 different places. This is where you get into the first sort of, what if we try to fix that bug? We would have to actually talk. We would get all these people to talk to each other. How many teams does that involve? You've got these guys would have to have meetings or talk with these guys because it's wrong on both their sides. Then they would also have to talk to Vancouver, as in is the problem here. And then they would also have to talk to the DBA team. So less likely to the Bangalore folks in this case, but you certainly have 1, 2, 3, 4 teams, which in order to fix that one bug, would have to communicate with each other. And this is where we get into the no-win situation piece. Nobody owns the entire problem. Every arrow in this diagram translates to meetings, translates to emails, translates in this case to time zones over which you have to coordinate. So there's a dimension to architecture which is actually organizational and communications related. Who has been in a situation like this before where you didn't own your own stack? It's kind of, yeah. And so the problem is becoming clear. You presented this plan, you have to do something about it. So how do you sell this? This is a necessity for change. In order to deliver this, the favorites page is another one. You can't do the favorites page alone. If you can't, because the way it's set up is that you have one team available. You have to coordinate 3 teams. If that page, 2 teams. The favorites only available from here. At least 2 teams, because the front end and back end is not all by the same group. Simpler than the bug, but the page is more complicated probably than the bug fix, so there's still a coordination problem. And what happens is you set people up for these cage matches. If you really do have a different part of the organization in charge of this and this, unless they are all enlightened beings, if things go, hey, this is a natural waterfall, we cannot do the favorite page until your backend has the validation rules and the system is working. Now, if you design two interfaces and do everything right, you can work around that, but it would be nicer to avoid having that situation, because you really don't want the overhead, and you don't want people in these cage matches when things go wrong, finger pointing, all the rest of it. So the better way is to restructure things so they don't work this way. So let's look. This was sort of, I went through this already. The reality of this situation is that you get a much more complex thing, which involves more participants. The real plan is much more complicated than what it first looks like. So let's look at a potentially better way of architecting this. This is how to architect things so you don't get into the no-win situation where you have to have all these various people constantly talking to each other. Because you've got 4 teams involved, they all have to trust each other, they all have to trust that the other guy picks up the baton at the right time, they all have to trust that they got at least most of the requirements right, because if they go back to the drawing board, it involves a lot more people, a lot more meetings, a lot more friction. So the alternative is to design one part of the solution. The unique solution to building trust is not to need any. So you get yourself in a situation where you re-architect, if you can, this thing as a message-driven system. You have your root and bus maintenance site, you have your bug collector, and then publish a bus update event, a route update event, a bus location update event. It all goes to a transit system which owns the database, stores routes, arrivals, and buses, and it's queried by a query API from the mobile and website application. We're assuming here that it really is the same functionality between the two, the same routes and the same model, and this is just views. And if you look at the team structure, it is now owned by, for example, this is now all owned by one team, so they control the look and feel completely and the flow completely. And here you have your team 3, one team which owns the transit system completely. If you manage to architect this way, then you only have 2 teams involved to solve the problem. You can now fix this bug, and first of all, is it the problem of the front end for this thing? One team and hopefully one location can pass notes, hey, is there a bug somewhere in your generation of the mobile view, of the website view? Stays among us, it doesn't open up, it's better abstracted. There are less people you have to trust to establish whether it's the front part of the system or the back part of service or something. Same here, this owns everything. They can simulate these events coming in, and they can check things out, and this team has to talk to no one. And same if anything goes wrong with data collection or this. You get into a situation where you remove a lot of this potential for friction and need for, instead of increasing trust, you decrease the need to trust them in the first place, because you take communication into consideration when you architect your solutions, right? So this is the Geek. This is the one in the magic tool thing, whatever. It's basically when you architect and design and structure your applications, take communications paths into consideration. Reduce the need for people to talk to each other to begin with, and reduce the possibility for disconnects, for having them co-located in shouting distance whenever possible. So architect towards optimizing communication. Yeah, well, we've got a legacy stack. How would we do that? Okay, one way to do it, if you have a legacy stack, which we all have, where you have all these departments, is you put yourself in a position where you can refactor or rebuild towards the state by having virtual teams. You have your official organization where everybody reports to whoever, and rather than having to trust you that you will rejig the entire organization, form virtual teams, task forces with members from all these various acts which do these the necessary changes. Once you have that, then you can gradually move to something where the architecture below is better organized for interperson communication. Very hard to answer, very hard to do in reality. But this is an example for how to architect so you need less trust. Okay? So this was one of the factors which I wanted to introduce, where you one of the no-win situations you can be in is you must own, this is to be avoided like the plague. If you want to retain trust, you must own everything that changes in the project you're dealing with. Or if there's any other bunch of guys you rely on, it's going to be a lot harder, require a lot more trust. So your application depends on something else. Make sure you own both. Yeah, but that means you'll never have some sort of reusable backend or interface, right? How can you trust a solution like that? Well, the pat answer is, depends what you're depending on. We said own everything that changes. If the thing that changes is just, if the backend dependent component is just being built at this time, then you must own it. You have one team which builds your application and this. Have somebody watch it like a hawk, so architecturally and requirements-wise, they don't build a silo, but you must own it both, otherwise you're hooked. And then on the other hand, once the dependent component is built, and there's very little change on it, then you don't need to own it anymore. This is where you get your platform, your API from this. Once it's built, the next project round which uses it doesn't need to own it. Same way in which we, of course, don't own, we don't have to coordinate with the .NET 4 team all the time to build our applications at Microsoft. And so, because it's already built. But initially, when they built that with pilot customers, I don't know, did they talk to actual users and coordinate with them when they built .NET 4? I don't know, but it would probably, yeah, you think so, right? You trust them that they did that. So, what does that trigger? They're trying to push these ideas. What does that trigger in people? Are you saying that, for example, arrival time estimator got kind of rolled into this new solution, it's no longer there, and you do have the arrival time estimator team somewhere, and how does it make them feel? Are you saying that the arrival time estimator team does not communicate well with stakeholders? We are the arrival time estimator team. Are you trying to break up our department? You have to deal with all that. And that's the part where I'm running out of answers. This is where you need very top-level support for all these changes. And when it comes to that top-level support, very high up the totem pole, you need support from a stakeholder who owns all the teams involved. Then comes the all-important second piece, which although all-important is a lot shorter because we're running out of time. It's how do you need to define success with your top-level stakeholder beforehand. What does success look like in an agile transformation? Well, that's one definition of success. Everything went according to plan, right? Second definition of success could be, that's because the first one was traditional, then it's agile. We learned something new and adapted quickly. How do you measure whether you've succeeded or not? It's not that the need for learning something new appeared. No, you don't measure that. You don't measure deviation from the plan, which is something new came along which we didn't anticipate, deviates from the plan. You measure how quickly the team adapted. Now, if you have crossed wires with your sponsors at the executive or other level about what success in your Agile transition looks like, especially on this point, you're in deep trouble. If they, in their own head, measure whether everything went according to plan, and what you see as learning is seen as something which didn't work out because of lack of planning, you are in deep trouble. So the second part of this thing, other than design, if you're a geek, one thing you have control over is your designs. Design for taking communication between people into consideration. The second one is be totally clear that you and your boss share the definition of success. How fast did you adapt is a good one. Was it fast enough for what the business needed? There you're starting to optimize the right things and having the right conversation. Then you have the summary of all this. Avoid no-win situations. Design processes and applications so you can own your stack. What changes together must be managed and developed together. Build a shared understanding of what success looks like. And this still sounds wobbly and it forever will be. But look harmless. Shut up, listen, and smile. It breaks down lots of resistance. Thank you very much for listening.